During the Civil War, while people were fighting a particularly brutal physical conflict, a political conflict was underway. Virginia v. West Virginia. It was not so easy and it was not so quick, but Virginia did fracture into two states, particularly over the issue of secession from the Union. Virginia later tried to reclaim the territories in West Virginia, the state itself, back into Greater Virginia, and ultimately they lost. And right now, we've got the big, breaking, maybe silly, maybe serious news. Oregon State Senator files bill to let more than half of the state secede and join Idaho. And you know what? This very well may happen. Now, if it was going to happen, it would take some time. But there are very, very good arguments for the splitting off of half of Oregon into, well, a little bit more than half of Oregon, into Idaho. Notably, all of these districts that are voting in favor of joining Idaho are sparsely populated and more conservative. It wouldn't change the balance of the Senate, the Electoral College, or Congress. And in fact, there's only one member of Congress for this whole area. So it wouldn't take away that much voting power. It would just mean that the people in these districts that believe in governance for, of, and by the people will get just that. And the Greater Idaho movement have made their case saying the purpose of state-level governance is so that people who live in different parts of this country can have local representation. And I completely agree. Now, there's a bunch of other movements. There's the New California movement. There's the movement for the state of Jefferson to break off Northern California. Seems like secession and reorganization is in the air. But I ask my friends, why would Oregon, Portland, the woke bastion of the United States, give up their slaves? The people who live in the eastern portion of Oregon have little voice, almost no voice. They pay taxes and live under the boot of those in Western Oregon. Why would they agree to it? In Oregon, the government, the state government, would have to approve of this, and so would Congress. But it's going to be interesting because the argument has been made, similar to West Virginia, that if the counties vote for it, then you do it. And the Supreme Court held in West Virginia v. Virginia that these counties in West Virginia were in fact a part of West Virginia. Case closed. Now, would they have to go back on precedent to reject the people of Eastern Oregon from joining Idaho? It will be interesting. In the end, there will be a shift in some power. If this does happen, Idaho will gain one electoral college vote, presumably, and Oregon will lose one, presumably. It would be interesting as per redistricting. It may actually not change the congressional makeup at all. It may actually turn out that Idaho still doesn't have enough people to have more than one member of they have four, but it wouldn't change the total number because absorbing this group may just mean that they jump. I'm sorry, they have two congressional districts. I was wrong again. I believe they have two. So ultimately, the total population gained may not be enough to warrant another congressional seat. But we'll have to read to break that down. Because you also do, as I mentioned, have the state of New California and you have the precedent of West Virginia. So let's read and learn. Will Idaho break apart? Another component of this story, of course, is the culture war and the potential for civil war. It's no surprise that we are seeing many things that haven't happened since the Civil War happening now, and that's got to be somewhat worrying. You had the speaker vote, 15 votes to elect Kevin McCarthy. Hasn't happened since the Civil War. Now, granted, and during the Civil War, I think it was like 100 and some odd votes to actually confirm a speaker. It was just before the Civil War, but also a state breaking apart. In this instance, it's not becoming two states. It's joining a different state. But if this does happen, think about what that will mean for Northern California, for parts of Colorado. It could reorganize the whole country. And get this. If rural portions of states broke off from the liberal portions, I don't think a Democrat will ever win an election again. But let's talk about it. Before we get started, head over to timcast.com, become a member to support our work directly as a member. You get access to exclusive segments from the Timcast IRL podcast, Monday through Thursday at 11 p.m., and you directly support our work and our cultural endeavors. Just this past weekend, we went to DC's Freedom Plaza and put on a little skate hangout session, meet and greet. Went off without a hitch. Not a single hater. And this proved a point. And I hope it proved the point to those in the skateboarding industry. Woke people are not a part of your culture or community, and they have no say. Because when I announced my presence a week in advance, all day, every day, not a single hater showed up. All the locals were big fans. So stop bowing to the woke mob. Support our work at timcast.com if you want to see more stuff like this. Smash the like button, subscribe to this channel, share the show with your friends. Let's read. From timcast.com, Oregon State Senator files bill to let more than half of the state secede and join Idaho. Republican State Senator Dennis Linthicum's bill, Joint Memorial 2, would allow 15 counties to leave the state. The bill, which is being called the Greater Idaho Bill, states that the voting patterns of Eastern Oregon have for many decades resembled the voting patterns of Idaho, but not of Oregon, indicating a desire for a different style of governance. It also states that Eastern Oregonians have begun to see Oregon government as a threat to the livelihoods, liberties, and values of their communities, as the preferences of the voters of Northwestern Oregon appear at odds with the livelihoods and values of Eastern Oregon communities. According to the Greater Idaho movement, this proposal is different from creating a new state because it does not affect the balance of power in the U.S. Senate. This means that it's more likely to be approved by the Oregon legislature. I agree with that. The Oregon legislature is going to say, well, we're not going to lose any senators. In fact, it guarantees a liberalizing of their existing senators. Right now, you have to pander somewhat to these eastern counties. You want to win them over, especially if they're worried about a Republican. They'll never have to worry about a Republican governor again or members of the Senate because it will be all of the liberal districts locked up tight. The movement's website states that Oregon will continue to violate more and more American values and American freedoms because Northwestern Oregon has 79% of Oregon's population and voters. Fortunately, Boise has only 13% of Idaho's population. Now, that's interesting. Eastern Oregon is culturally, politically, economically much more similar to Idaho than it is to Western Oregon, said Matt McCaw, a spokesman for the Greater Idaho movement, according to a report from the Daily Mail. Our movement is about self-determination and matching people to government that they want and that matches their values. In Oregon, we've had this urban-rural divide for a very long time. So far, 11 counties have voted in favor of joining Idaho. Despite the winning votes, lawmakers in both states, as well as Congress, would have to approve the secession for the counties to split off. Quote, our proposal is to take that border between Oregon and Idaho, which was set almost 200 years ago in a very different time when there was only 50,000 people in the state of Oregon. It made sense then. It doesn't make sense now to have that border there because that's not where the cultural divide is, McCaw said. The policy and the government that works for Western Oregon, the Western Oregonians want, does not work in Eastern Oregon, and it is not what Eastern Oregonians want. McCaw added, we have been to the legislature in Idaho. We've had a lot of support in the legislature in Idaho for the idea. They see the benefit of bringing 400,000 like-minded people into their state. It makes Idaho stronger. It gives people the government they want, and it's a win-win for everybody involved. I certainly think so. I'd like to see it happen. Over at the Greater Idaho movement, they state their case, saying, counties can become a part of Idaho. State lines have been relocated many times in American history because it just takes an interstate compact between two state legislatures and approval of Congress. If the U.S. were governed as a single state, we wouldn't have the opportunity for state governance to vary according to the culture of a local area. The purpose of having state lines is to allow the variance. The Oregon-Idaho border was established 163 years ago and is now outdated. It makes no sense in its current location because it doesn't match the location of the cultural divide in Oregon. Areas that vote like Idaho does are economically healthy enough to be welcomed by Idaho. That are economically healthy enough. They're eastern, southern, and most of central Oregon. southeastern Washington, and northeastern California. Now that's interesting. They're not just talking about leaving Oregon in this post. They're talking about potentially California and Washington as well. They say the proposal is different from creating a new state because it does not affect the balance of power. Our proposal is a win-win for the interests of each state legislature and for the counties that get to switch states. Take a look at this. Look at the Oregon counties. Counties that have not yet voted on joining Greater Idaho are Umatilla, Gilliam, Crook, Deschutes, and Wasco. But this borderline would split Wasco and Deschutes in half. And I'm probably pronouncing those wrong. It's probably like Deschutes or something, or Deschutes. Anyway, but 11 already have. And Wallowa, however you pronounce it, is set to vote soon. I think it's a brilliant idea. I think it's entirely possible. Let me show you some examples why it makes sense. Oregon, Washington to join California in banning gas-powered new vehicles starting 2035. This is why I personally just bought a bunch of Tesla stock. 2 reasons. Tesla stock tanked because people, well, for whatever reason, Elon Musk says macroeconomics. The woke people are saying, or, a lot of people are saying it's because Elon's occupation over at Twitter. Whatever. All I see is Tesla stock tanked by like 60 some odd percent. There's a buy opportunity. California, Oregon, Washington, banning gas cars. There's an opportunity. Hey, personally, I like Tesla. I like Elon Musk. I'm not the most trusting of him, but I got no problem with it. There's some companies like spy agencies I wouldn't recommend investing in, or companies like BlackRock and things like that. I like Tesla. I do. I do see some problems if, in the end, they can control when you can charge your car or how and when you can drive. But to be honest, my friends, it doesn't matter if it's gas or otherwise. They could do the same thing. And you can theoretically make your own electric car. So I'm not super concerned about centralized control as it pertains to the fuel source. But I digress. Take a look at this story. If you're in Eastern Oregon and you need to use a tractor or a plow or a bulldozer or a steamroller or something, what? Is it going to have to be electric? That would be stupid. Maybe for farming equipment, there's an exemption. But they're going to make you, for those who need to drive the most, drop gasoline and buy electric. Now, I'm willing to bet a lot of these people living in rural areas who drive a bit more are going to say, no way. I'm not going to rely on the grid for this. The states are on track to align their own zero-emission vehicle rules with the policy in California, whose Air Resource Board voted in August to set a zero-emission standard for new vehicles sold there beginning 2035. Banning the sale of new vehicles powered by gasoline or diesel means all new vehicles sold on the West Coast will have to be powered by electric batteries. You ready for this one, my friends? You ready for this one? Wyoming is set to ban sales of new electric vehicles by 2035 to ensure the stability of its oil and gas industry. Tell me, my friends, you do not see civil war on the horizon. Okay, whatever, man. Maybe no civil war, but how can a country exist when some states are banning electric cars, some states are banning gas cars? The cultural divide has become so pronounced that states are trying to break apart. Come on, man. A civil war, maybe not the right word. Restructuring, reorganizing. But if it was just, say, Greater Oregon, I'd say, well, reorganization is probably a good idea. It can probably preserve the union. I would say that now. I think that's fair. But then you take a look at the political conflict, the fighting, the cultural divide on issues like this. And it's like, it's not just about whether or not we can self-govern properly as states. It's about the culture being so divided, people just are doing the exact opposite of each other. And that's the point here. I'd be willing to bet that when it comes to Greater Idaho, they're going to be more aligned with Wyoming. Duh. They're going to say, look, we're going to frack, we're going to drill for oil, and we're going to be just fine. The rest of Oregon and Washington, sorry, no gas-powered vehicles for you, just the opposite. It's going to be really weird. You're going to drive Think about this. You're in Oregon and you're like, I'm going to take me a drive, or you're in Washington, let's say. I'm going to take me a drive over to Wyoming. And all of a sudden you can't charge your car. You're going to be in Wyoming and you're going to drive into Oregon or Washington, no gas stations. How will that work? Especially for trucking. Think about that for 2 seconds. How will trucking work if some states are gas and some states are electric? It won't. But how will it go down is the question. Let me show you this real quick. Over at 270 to win, we can see that Oregon has 7 electoral votes and Idaho has 4. This means that Oregon basically has 5 congressional, well, it looks like they have 6 congressional districts. So in the new, I'm assuming this is new districting with the new year. They gained a seat, I would imagine, because the way the Electoral College works, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm pretty sure you get an electoral vote for every member of the Senate and for every member of Congress. So right now, so to fix my math, it looks like Oregon has 6 congressional districts and it has 2 Senate seats, which means that's going to be 8 votes. Idaho, actually, I'm not entirely sure. I didn't pull up Idaho. At the time, had 4. Maybe they have more right now. Maybe we can, Oregon's congressional districts. There's Idaho right there. Let's do, we'll look up Idaho congressional districts. We'll take a look at where they're currently sitting with 2. The bigger question here actually is going to be the population of Idaho. And right now, the population of Idaho, total size, wow, seriously? Where are we at? 1.8 million. It's about 750,000 people for every, I think it's 775 right now for every seat in Congress. So it about makes sense they have 2. Let's add another 400,000 people, and it looks like they will gain a congressional seat and an electoral vote, which means as of right now with 2 seats, 2 senators, they would go up to 5 electoral college votes. Now I want you to imagine what would happen if the entire country operated that way. If every single red state, blue state, had their red portions break off to join their red state neighbors, blue states would collapse in size, red states would balloon in size, and a Democrat would never win again. Well, not literally. What would likely have to happen is Democrats would start having to try to win red states, and it would shift this country dramatically. Outside of the Greater Idaho movement, you also have a California group advocating for splitting for the creation of the 51st state of New California. Now, they want to make another state. This one, in my opinion, sorry guys, it's a bit stupid. The reason? What they want to do is take all the rural counties, make it a state, and then all of the urban counties, their own state, which basically creates weird pockets of California as just as islands sitting in the sea of New California. Sorry, I don't see that making sense. But I do think the way things are going, either this country gets ripped apart or it realigns. We have this from interactive polls. Do you consider yourself a Republican or a Democrat? In 2008, the average, D plus 12. 2010, D plus 1. 2012, D plus 5. 14 plus 3. 16, D plus 5. 18, D plus 6. In 2020, the polling showed the average person plus 5 points said they were a Democrat. As of 2022, Republicans have 45 to Democrats 44, creating for the first time since 2008, at least with their tracking, an R plus 1. It looks like that may be the first time since 1991 more people have said they are Republican. So I can put it this way. Maybe what we're really seeing is a political realignment. And it won't be a civil war. Fine. The precedent is there. I am absolutely fascinated by the history of West Virginia and how it came to be. And I'll give you the dramatically oversimplified version. Separation from Virginia on Wikipedia has several main articles. The Ordinance of Secession, the Wheeling Convention, the Restored Government of Virginia, the State of Kanawha. Let's look at that one. Admission to the Union. List of U.S. states by date of admission, border states, West Virginia, and the American Civil War. I'll give you the simplified version, as I said. There is talk of secession in Virginia. Virginia, of course, encompassed all of the territories of West Virginia and Virginia. When it came to vote, the northwestern areas were leaning towards not seceding. They weren't too happy with the idea. Ultimately, a bunch of votes happened, and people in West Virginia, this is over years, this is in the middle of the Civil War, this is like 1862, meaning the war has already been going on. They say, we do not recognize the vote in Virginia. We do not want to secede from the United States because that would be an act of revolution or rebellion, so we say no. What ends up happening? There's a vote. West Virginia agrees. Virginia agrees. The Senate agrees, Congress agrees. But in Virginia, when the war is coming down, again, I'm oversimplified, and this is a cursory glance here. I could be wrong. You guys correct me. Basically, Virginia's like, no, that doesn't count. We're back in the Union. The war is over. West Virginia is Virginia. And the Supreme Court said no. It's amazing. The Second Wheeling Convention, June 11th, 1861, declared that since the Secession Convention had been called without proper popular consent, all of its acts were void, and all who adhered to it had vacated their offices. The Wheeling Conventions of the delegates themselves were never actually elected by public ballot to act on behalf of Western Virginia. Of its 103 members, 33 had been elected to the Virginia General Assembly on May 23rd. This included some holdover state senators whose 4-year terms had begun in 1859, and some who vacated their offices to convene in Wheeling. Other members were chosen even more irregularly, some in mass meetings, other by county committee, and still others were seemingly self-appointed. An act for the reorganization of the government was passed on June 19th. The next day, convention delegates chose Francis H. Pierpont as governor of Virginia and elected other officers to a rival state government and 2 U.S. senators, Willie and Carlisle, to replace secessionists before adjourning. The federal government promptly recognized the new government and seated the 2 senators. Thus, there were 2 state governments in Virginia, one pledging allegiance to the U.S. and one to the Confederacy. You see, they didn't call themselves West Virginia. They were just like, nah, we're Virginia. And then Virginia and Richmond was like, nah, we're Virginia. It's amazing, isn't it? Now they go on to get much, much more into the nitty gritty, the controversies. On May 13th, 1862, the state legislature of the reorganized government approved the formation of the new state. An application for admission to the Union was made to Congress, introduced by Senator Waitman Willie of the restored government of Virginia. Carlisle sought to sabotage the bill, first trying to expand the new state's boundaries to include the Shenandoah Valley, and then to defeat the Willie Amendment at home. December 31st, 1862, Abraham Lincoln approved an enabling act admitting West Virginia on the condition that a provision for the gradual abolition of slavery be inserted in its constitution. Very interesting. They reconvened a convention on February 12th, yada, yada, yada. The question of the constitutionality of the formation of the new state was later brought before the Supreme Court in Virginia v. West Virginia. Berkeley and Jefferson counties, where I live, lying on the Potomac east of the mountains, voted in favor of the annexation to West Virginia in 1863 with the consent of Virginia's reorganized government. This is fascinating. Virginia sues. They say, no way, dude. You can't do that. They were basically trying to argue that these 2 counties did not have the authority to vote to leave. It's not recognized, and thus the entirety of West Virginia is not recognized. Virginia v. West Virginia, 1871, is a 6-3 ruling by the Supreme Court that held that if a governor has discretion in the conduct of the election, the legislature is bound by his action and cannot undo the results based on fraud. Very interesting. The court implicitly affirmed that the breakaway Virginia counties had received the necessary consent from both the Commonwealth of Virginia and the U.S. Congress to become a separate U.S. state. The court also explicitly held that Berkeley County and Jefferson County were part of the state of West Virginia. I'm not a scholar here. Probably got a lot of the details muddied. Totally accept that. Y'all who are experts on the Civil War, correct me in the comments. Let me know. The important, there was another Virginia v. West Virginia. What is that one? Outstanding debt. Interesting. The point here is there has already been a Supreme Court ruling as it pertains to a state being broken in two. It's not the same thing as what we're seeing with the Greater Idaho movement. It's entirely possible that with Greater Idaho, you want to break apart Oregon and have them join Idaho, and that's a different precedent. But I believe there's enough precedent here that if the counties in Oregon say, we are leaving, they need only cite this history. And then it'll be up to the Supreme Court to make the decision. There is one thing I think holding back Oregon, I should say Eastern Oregon, from joining Greater Idaho, and that is the unwillingness of anyone to directly involve themselves in matters as such. Meaning, there are a lot of people at the time when this country was being formed and new states were being admitted, it was the norm that borders were shifting. And such, they said, look, we're the ones who made this government, is my grandpa, right? We're making new states. Let's get it right now and vote for the rest of us. It's been hundreds of years. Most people alive today have been alive with 50 states. Nothing has changed. And though they used to change all the time, I mean, when was it Hawaii and Alaska were admitted in the early 60s, late 50s? I don't know my geography dates. Sorry, guys. I should. So there are people alive today that were born when there were less than 50 states, when most people were born with 50 states, grew up with 50 states, only ever been 50 states. And they don't want more. Changing these things would be weird. Adding a star to the flag, more senators, more electoral votes. People don't want change. People don't want to vote for that stuff. But I do think it's possible. You got people who want DC statehood. Huge mistake, by the way. Puerto Rico statehood. Completely agree with that one, I might add. And that would be bad for Republicans, mind you. I just think people need to grow a little balls, all right? Start recognizing you are in charge. This is your government. Stop thinking that it is other people who will lead the way. Stop thinking that it is other people who will build the industries. It is you. You have inherited this. You are the only one who can stand up to change it. It's an interesting thought, you know. I remember when I was younger, I was always looking up to these older people and these people in industry because they knew what was up. I remember always asking my dad for answers, and he always had them. And then I remember the first time in my life when my dad didn't have the answer because the problems were becoming more sophisticated and more complicated and pertaining to industries he'd not been a part of. When I'm younger and I say something like, how do I make money? And he says, mow lawns. And then I do, and it worked. I'm like, wow. When I'm older and I'm like, how do I challenge the supervisor on this policy position? It's like, dude, I don't know. You got to talk to your union rep or something like that. I started to realize at this point, that's a point in my life, that it's you. You're an adult. You've been handed the keys to this country and this world, and it is on you now. Because I see too much of this. Too much of people think it's other people who run the show, who think, well, we can't change it. It's always been this way. Nah, it can be changed. You are holding the keys and you're in the driver's seat. It's a weird feeling as I get older too, as this company expands. Yeah, I don't know where we'll end up in 10, 15 years. I'm hoping maybe we'll be something bigger than Vice. You know, I like Vice. Vice kind of went, if you know what I mean. But maybe we will become a large upstart. I don't know. Or maybe we'll always just be a single show with some ancillary shows around it. One thing I do know is, as we do the work and we expand, we make more money. We gain knowledge. We know. So it's not just about ownership and inheritance. It's about development. I think about the consultants who ran media and politics 20 years ago. How did they get there? How did they know when to vote? How did they know when to lobby. They grew up with these things around them. Now I think about where we're at today. You're the expert. That 60-year-old dude who's working, at some political firm, he doesn't know what's going on TikTok. And I mean, no offense to those who are watching who are in their 60s. But it's going to be some 15-year-old kid, an expert on TikTok, and TikTok will play a role in the next few years in the election. 100%. That's good for China. It's bad for us. But this means that some kid right now who's 16, 17 years old will be voting in the next election. TikTok expert. When this person's in their late 20s, they are going to know more about quick release social media video than anyone else, and they will get paid the millions of dollars. The reason I'm telling you this, for those that are watching right now what Oregon is doing, understand you are the inheritor and the expert. So if you run for office, if you lobby your members of Congress, you can implement these changes. You can own a company. You can start a company. You can change the shape of this country for the better. But I guess it's really just up to you, because some people may not want to. That's fine. Maybe you want to just have a nice job, feed your family, sit back, watch some movies, and enjoy your life. By all means. Others will seek to enter the fray to challenge those at the top and say, enough. You've had your time. Your time has come to retire. So looking at people like Pelosi and McConnell, we need you to take their place, to run for office and say, we shall fix this system. We will change it. It is our turn now. Not like Kevin McCarthy. Now, when he says it's my turn, that's his political ambition. I'm saying it is the turn of our generation to fix these things. One thing I worry about. Shout out to the boomers, keeping this country sane for as long as you have. Not perfectly, but to a certain degree. When they go, it's going to get woke. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 6 p.m. over at youtube.com/TimCastNews. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you all then.